Hi, fifth grade. Let's keep reading. Don't go to the principal's office. We are so close to done. I think we're going to finish it this week. Yeah, I just remembered that too. Did you think Mrs. Stefanos heard me scream? No, she has that TV turned up really loud, and this couple's having a fight. The woman's doing a lot of screaming. I'm sure she thought it was just part of the program. I looked at my watch. We only have a couple of minutes. We have to find something. Ted and I ran down the wooden stairs. This basement didn't look like anything like our basement. There were wooden shelves lining the walls, and there were glass jars full of green beans and peaches and tomatoes and garden stuff like that. But they were all covered in cobwebs. I bet some pioneer woman canned that stuff over 100 years ago, I said. It doesn't look like anybody's been down here in a long time. That's what makes it the perfect hiding place, I said. No one would suspect it. There was junk piled everywhere, but in one corner there was a wooden shelf with a lot of tools, so that's where we'd headed. We didn't have to look long. There, right on top and in plain sight, was a saw, and it had blood on it, Ted cried. I looked at it. Sure enough, there was blood along the teeth. The murder weapon, I said. I pulled my handkerchief out of my pocket. What are you doing? Ted asked. I don't want to smear the fingerprints, I replied. I've seen policemen do this on TV. I had just picked up the saw when the door to the basement opened. Mrs. Stefanos was looking down right at us. Ted? Richard? What are you boys doing down there? Looking for the restroom? Ted said. It came out as a question, but Mrs. Stefanos didn't seem to notice. You mean you haven't found it yet? Mrs. Stefanos said. Oh, no, ma'am, and I'm dying to go. He ran up the stairs. Could you please show me where it is? For just a split second, I thought Ted had lost his mind, but then I realized that all he had done was get Mrs. Stefanos away from the door so I could take the saw upstairs without her knowing. I hurried up the stairs, peeked around the corner of the door, and saw they weren't in the kitchen. Then I turned out the light, shut the door, and stopped. Now what? I wondered. How was I going to get this saw out to Mrs. Stefanos' car without her seeing it? I decided the only thing I could do was slip out the front door, put the saw in the back seat with me, and then wait for them to come out. It took them 10 minutes, because they were looking all over the house for me. But finally they both came walking down the steps of the porch. I could tell that Mrs. Stefanos was angry, but I said, Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said it was time to go, so I just came out to the car. The saw was on the floor underneath my legs. Well, I didn't know that, Richard, and we've been looking all over the house for you. Ted looked at me, and I nodded. He got into the front seat. I'm really sorry, Mrs. Stefanos, I said. Well, okay. She got into the car, and we headed back towards the school. I really didn't mean for you boys to miss so much of the school day. Oh, I just shouldn't have watched that soap opera, but it's so wonderful to be able to do it during the day. There's just something different about watching a soap opera at night, after I get off work. I mean, after all, they're called daytime dramas, so it's kind of strange watching them at night. By the time we got back to school, Mrs. Stefanos had told us everything that had happened during today's episodes, then what had happened in the months before, and what she thought was going to happen in the months to come. Finally, she pulled into the parking space. Oh, I can't believe how late I am. You need to hurry, boys. The telephone is probably ringing off the wall. I really shouldn't have watched that soap opera. You go on ahead, Mrs. Stefanos, Ted said. We'll look up for you. Oh, thank you so much, Ted. You're such a wonderful boy. Thank you both for helping me with Mr. Amsted's boxes. It was our pleasure, I said. Will he be back tomorrow? Oh, yes. He told me this morning when he called about the boxes that he would. That's good, I said. Ted and I took our time slowly taking off our seatbelts, slowly opening the door, and slowly getting out of the car, where we slowly stretched until Mrs. Stefanos had disappeared through the front door. Then Ted said, Did you get it? I nodded and, using my handkerchief, held it up for him to see. What are we going to do with it now? I've been thinking about that. And? Well, I think we should leave it right here in Mrs. Stefanos' car with the back door unlocked. That's crazy. She'll find it. I just mean until after school's out. Then I think you should take it home with you because I don't really have a good place to hide it. Ted thought for a minute. Okay, I guess that'll work. I'll come out here after class, make sure no one's watching me when I open the door, get the saw and then take it home. I've got a great place to hide it. Tomorrow you can bring it to school wrapped in newspaper, and then together we can show it to Mr. Amstead. We need to make sure that Chief Gooseby is there too. I thought for a minute. You're right. Tonight I'll call him anonymously and tell him that we're going to confront Mr. Amstead with the weapon he used to saw his wife in half. And if he wants to be there when Mr. Amstead confesses, he's to be at the principal's office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But he'll know who's calling, Richard. He'll come to our houses tonight and demand that we give him the saw. I thought for another minute. Okay, I've got it. We'll make the call to Chief Gooseby just 5 minutes before we show the saw to Mr. Amstead. It'll work. This time tomorrow, Mr. Amstead will be in police custody, and the students at Croswell Elementary School will be safe again. This is the start of a new chapter, but I think we have some time, so let's keep reading. But everything got messed up. Actually, it started out all right. Ted brought the bloody saw to school with him the next morning, and I had seen Mr. Amstead from a distance just as I got there, so I knew he was back, like Mrs. Stefanos had said he would be. But Mrs. Matlin wasn't at school. She was homesick with a cold, which meant we had a sub. I had panicked. Substitutes usually won't let you do anything because they all think that you're trying to get away with something. This one was no exception. Her name was Mrs. Charlin. Ted and I both told her we were supposed to go to the principal's office that morning. We didn't tell her it was because we'd gotten in trouble over the sprinkler system at his house, though. But she said she'd have to check first. She called Mr. Amstead's office on the intercom. Mrs. Stefanos, Ted and Richard said that Mr. Amstead needed to come see them this morning. Is that correct? I'll check, Mrs. Charlin. Mrs. Stefanos said. She clicked off, and Ted and I waited confidently. Then Mrs. Stefanos clicked back on. No, he doesn't need to see them this morning, she said. I looked at Ted. He looked at me. Then I took a deep breath and said, We got in trouble Friday, Mrs. Charlin. Mr. Amstead said he wanted to see us in his office first thing Monday morning, but he was gone. He must have forgotten now that it's Tuesday, so I think we're obligated to go down there and remind him. Mrs. Charlin blinked. Now let me get this straight. You're asking me to send you to the principal's office so you can take your punishment? I nodded. Ted nodded reluctantly. Mrs. Charlin looked at us for several minutes. I tried to return her look without blinking. Finally, she said, I'll let you go, one at a time. Ted, you may go first. Ted's eyes went wide. Why me? I was thinking fast. It's all right, Ted. You go ahead. It'll be all right. He turned to me. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said between clenched teeth. Now go on. I smiled at Mrs. Charlin. Ted picked up the saw that was still wrapped in newspaper and started out of the room. What's that? Mrs. Charlin demanded. It's something that Mr. Amstead asked us to bring with us when we came to accept our punishment, I said hurriedly. Thank goodness, Ted continued walking out the door. When he returns, Richard, you may go. Now sit down and start your work. Mrs. Charlin, I forgot to bring mine. She looked at me. Your what? You know that thing that Ted was carrying with him? Well, I was supposed to bring one too, but I left it in my room at home. Mr. Amstead's going to be really mad about this, so I need to go to the office and call Mom to bring it to school, before it's my time to go to Mr. Amstead's office. I could tell that Mrs. Charlin was getting really exasperated. I gave her my best grimace, as though I was in terrible pain because of the events that were about to transpire. She gave me a very long sigh and said, Okay, Richard, go on. I'm tired of arguing with you. I hurried out of the room. When I turned the corner, I couldn't see Ted anywhere. I'd been hoping that he'd wait for me outside the door to Mr. Amstead's office. Surely he knew I'd figure out some way to go with him. No one was around, though, so I started running down the hall. When I got to the door of the principal's office, I put my ear against it to see if I could hear anything. But all I could hear was Mrs. Stefanos' loud typewriter. Maybe, just maybe, I thought, Ted would be sitting on one of those benches waiting to go see Mr. Amstead. I opened the door and went inside. But Ted wasn't anywhere around. Let's leave it there. That's a good cliffhanger.